In a small, peaceful neighborhood, there was a beautiful woman named Tola who moved in one sunny day. All the men in the neighborhood couldn't stop staring at her when she walked by. Her long, shiny hair, sparkling eyes, and graceful smile made everyone look twice. But Tola had a secret. She wasn't interested in just any man. Only the wealthy ones caught her attention. Among all the men, there was one who stood out: Peter. Peter was a businessman, but nobody really knew exactly what he did. He kept his work a secret, but one thing was clear: he had a lot of money. He spent it freely on fancy cars, big houses, and all sorts of luxurious things. Tola noticed him right away. She was drawn to his wealth, and Peter couldn't help but notice how beautiful she was. He started buying her all sorts of expensive gifts, shiny jewelry, new clothes, and things Tola had always dreamed of. Tola was thrilled. She thought, "This is exactly what I wanted all my life." One day, Peter looked at her with a serious expression and said, "No need to waste time. Let's get married." Tola's heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she said quickly, without hesitation. And just like that, they began planning the biggest wedding anyone had ever seen. People from all over the town came to watch. Every girl whispered, "I wish I could be Tola." It was the most beautiful wedding ever, with flowers everywhere and people dancing joyfully. After the wedding, Peter and Tola moved into a stunning house with a giant garden and a driveway full of shiny cars. Tola couldn't help but ask, "Peter, you have all this and you live in that neighborhood?" "Why?" Peter smiled and said, "I don't like showing off, Tola. I was looking for a wife who wouldn't just be after my wealth." Tola grinned, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. "So, I'm the lucky one," she said happily. But what Tola didn't know was that behind Peter's wealth was a dark secret, a secret he would do anything to keep hidden. Before he became rich, Peter had a hard life. After finishing school, he couldn't find a job. He sent out applications everywhere, but no one called him back. He was frustrated and sad. So one day, he walked into a shop to ask for a job as a salesperson. The owner agreed to hire him, and Peter worked hard. He was good at what he did, and soon, he was making more sales than anyone else. One day, a young man named Young Money came into the shop. Peter rushed over to serve him, but Young Money just smiled at him and asked, "How much do they pay you here?" Peter replied, 20,000 naira a month. Young Money laughed. "What can that amount do for you?" he said, pulling out a business card. "Call me later. I can make you rich." Peter was curious but had to hurry, so that night, after closing the shop, he called the number. He met Young Money in a private place, where Young Money promised to make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. But there was a price. "Follow my instructions and don't ask questions," Young Money warned. Peter agreed, and together, they drove to a dark, lonely road. There, an old man appeared holding a calabash, speaking in strange parables. Peter didn't understand, but Young Money told him to be quiet. The old man finally spoke, saying, "You will have money tonight, but to keep it, you must drink a woman's menstrual blood every month. And the woman you marry will never have children." Peter was shocked and frightened. The old man's words echoed in his mind. "If you leave, you will die?" Peter, feeling trapped by his circumstances, returned home that night, with a growing sense of fear and uncertainty. However, he kept his secret hidden and began to follow the dark instructions the old man had given him. Over time, Peter's actions became more erratic as he traveled to different towns, meeting people and making unusual promises in exchange for help. As he married, Peter continued to follow the strange advice, believing it was the key to his wealth and success. But deep down, Peter couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Then Peter married Tola, and she became his source of blood. Every month, he would wait until Tola was asleep. He would make her favorite food, add something to make her sleep deeply, and then he would take the blood he needed from her without her knowing. Tola had no idea about what Peter was doing. She loved her life of luxury and never once thought about having children. One day, Tola was sitting in a beauty salon when she met a woman who seemed to have it all: beauty, wealth, and a happy family. The woman smiled at Tola and asked, "How long have you been married? And why don't you have any children?" Tola was stunned. She had never thought about it. She had everything she wanted: the expensive clothes, the fancy cars, and the big house. But now, maybe a child would make everything complete. After that conversation, Tola couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe she should have children with Peter. She needed a child to complete her perfect life. Tola rushed home that evening, eager to talk to Peter. "Peter," she said, "I think we should have children now. I want to start a family with you. Maybe we should go to the hospital and see why I haven't gotten pregnant yet." But Peter's face changed. His eyes darkened, and his voice grew cold. "Why are you complaining? We're happy. We have everything we need." He stood up suddenly and left the house, slamming the door behind him. Peter rushed to meet the old man again, desperate to find a solution. The old man gave him a mysterious substance and said, "Add this to her food, and she will forget about having children forever." Peter hurried home, feeling both relief and fear. He made Tola's favorite meal, adding the strange substance to it. That night, Tola ate the food and fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. But as she slept, Peter couldn't help but wonder what his actions would lead to. Tola had no idea what Peter had done. As she slept, she felt a strange emptiness, as if something important was slipping away. Would she ever realize the truth? Would she discover what Peter had been hiding all along? But for now, everything seemed perfect. Tola enjoyed her life of luxury, and Peter kept his dark secret hidden. How long could this last? The next morning, after the terrible night, Peter didn't seem to care much. He bought Tola a brand new, shiny car and filled their house with fancy designer clothes and accessories. Tola, with her mind clouded by all the luxury, forgot about the conversation they had the night before. She felt happy again, her life filled with endless new things, but something deep down in her heart was missing. The thought of children seemed to vanish, as Peter had planned. As the weeks went by, everything seemed perfect again. Every month, Peter would carry on with his secret, drugging Tola's food and drink, so she wouldn't remember what he was doing to her. One night, as the time came for him to take her blood again, Peter quietly slipped something into her drink. But something was different that night. Tola woke up suddenly, feeling an odd sensation wash over her. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw Peter, her husband, standing beside the bed. His face was tense, and there was an unsettling look in his eyes. For a brief moment, Tola's heart skipped a beat. She felt a rush of confusion and fear. The room was dark, and she could barely make out the details of the situation. The air was thick with an odd silence that sent a chill down her spine. She didn't understand what was happening, but she knew something was wrong. Her mind raced as she tried to make sense of the moment, wondering if the actions of the man she loved were hiding something deeper and darker. Tola's breath caught in her throat, her face draining of color as she stared in disbelief. "Peter, what is going on?" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with shock. Peter froze, his expression one of guilt and panic. His voice was pleading as he stammered, "Tola, please, don't scream. Just let me explain. I promise, everything will make sense. But you have to keep this between us, please." Tola's heart raced as a wave of confusion, anger, and fear washed over her. "No, what is going on?" she shouted, pushing him away, her voice trembling with disbelief. She couldn't understand what was happening, and the emotions surged within her, leaving her feeling both helpless and determined to get answers. Peter quickly rushed to her, his face filled with desperation. "Tola, please, don't shout," he cried. But it was too late. Tola couldn't hold it in. Her screams were so loud, they echoed through the house. Peter, terrified that someone would hear, moved swiftly and tried to grab her throat, attempting to silence her. Tola fought with all her strength. She kicked and screamed, struggling to break free from his grip. It felt like a nightmare, one she couldn't wake up from. She felt his hands around her neck, squeezing tighter and tighter, but Tola didn't give up. With a sudden burst of strength, she managed to break free. She gasped for air and stumbled backward. Her heart was racing. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Peter was panting too, looking at her with fear in his eyes. But before he could move toward her again, Tola ran as fast as she could, heading straight for the door. She reached for the handle, but before she could open it, Peter grabbed her arm and pulled her back, his grip so strong it felt like a vice. "No, you're not going anywhere," he shouted angrily. Tola struggled again, but Peter was too strong. He dragged her back into the house and locked her in a small, dark room. There, no one would be able to hear her screams. She fell to the floor, feeling hopeless and scared. She wept silently, her heart breaking, her mind spinning with fear and confusion. Days passed, and Peter kept her locked away in that room. She refused to eat the food he brought her, but she was too thirsty to refuse the water. Every month, Peter would slip something into her drink again, so he could continue his awful ritual. He did this for months, but Tola's spirit was starting to break. One morning, when the room felt quieter than usual, something was different. Tola noticed that the door, which had always been locked, was slightly ajar. Her heart leapt in her chest. Was Peter gone? She cautiously got up, her hands shaking as she peeked through the crack in the door. There was no sign of Peter. It was her chance to escape. With her heart pounding, she stepped out of the room, taking slow, careful steps. She knew she had to leave before Peter came back. As she made her way through the house, she kept looking over her shoulder, afraid he would return at any moment. Finally, she reached the front door. She opened it as quietly as she could and ran as fast as her legs would carry her. She had no idea where she was going, but she just needed to get away. She ran and ran, not stopping until she found an elderly woman's house on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The woman lived far from Peter, so Tola felt a sense of relief. The elderly woman, seeing how frightened and exhausted Tola was, quickly ushered her inside and locked all the doors. Tola collapsed onto a couch, her body trembling. With tears in her eyes, she started to tell the elderly woman her story. The woman listened in shock, her eyes widening as Tola spoke about the terrible things her husband had done. "My goodness," the elderly woman whispered. "That's terrible, but don't worry, you're safe here now." The elderly woman kindly offered Tola a bath, food, and a place to rest. "We'll leave very late tonight. I know someone who can help you," she said. The next morning, Tola felt a little better, but her heart was still heavy with fear. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she trusted the kind woman. That afternoon, the elderly woman took Tola on a long walk. Tola was nervous, but nothing scared her more than what Peter had done. They walked through the streets, and Tola kept looking over her shoulder, half expecting Peter to appear at any moment. But when they reached the end of the path, Tola was surprised to see the elderly woman leading her toward a church. It wasn't a normal church, it felt peaceful and warm. As they entered, Tola felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in months. The elderly woman whispered, "This is where we can cleanse you of all the dark things that have happened." They knelt together, and the church filled with quiet, soothing prayers. The priests and other people there prayed over Tola, asking for protection and strength. They cleansed her, helping her heal from the dark magic and pain Peter had caused. Tola stayed there for days, recovering and finding peace. Meanwhile, Peter was in a frenzy, searching everywhere for her. He had no idea where she had gone. He went from house to house, asking neighbors and friends, but no one knew anything. The more he searched, the more confused he became. He didn't realize that Tola was safe, and he didn't know that consequences were waiting for him. Consequences that he couldn't escape. Tola had found a new life, one where she could heal and finally be free. But Peter was still out there, desperate, and things were about to get even more dangerous. What would happen next? Would Tola's past finally catch up with her, or would she be able to live the life she had always dreamed of? The answers were coming soon, but for now, Tola was safe, surrounded by people who cared for her. After spending a week at the church, Tola felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time. She could finally breathe again. She had learned so much about forgiveness, healing, and moving on from the past. One day, she stood up, looking at the horizon, and made a decision. She was ready to leave the past behind and start fresh. Tola asked for a divorce from Peter. She packed up her things, left the town where so much darkness had happened, and moved to a new town, determined to begin a new life full of hope and possibilities. As Tola started over, Peter's world was falling apart. His wealth, which had once been endless, began to dwindle. His businesses started failing, and one by one, everything he had worked for began to disappear. His once luxurious home became empty and silent. The old man, who had given Peter the power and wealth, suddenly appeared before him again. Peter's heart raced with fear. "Please," he begged. "I don't know what to do. Tola left me. She's gone. She asked for a divorce, and now she's in another town. I can't lose everything. Please, give me more time." But the old man didn't show any mercy. He looked at Peter with cold eyes, and in an angry voice said, "You know the deal. Peter, You agreed to it, and now you must fulfill your part. No more excuses." Then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the old man vanished into thin air, leaving Peter alone in his despair. Peter kneeled to the ground, feeling hopeless. The fear of losing everything was now more real than ever. Days passed, and his wealth, his businesses, and even his friends started disappearing. One by one, everything he had worked for was gone. Peter was now on the street, struggling to find food and shelter. He had nothing left. One day, while Peter was walking through the streets, lost and unsure of what to do next, he met a pastor. The pastor noticed Peter's downcast eyes and asked if he was okay. Peter, desperate and empty, told the pastor everything. He confessed how he had made a deal with dark forces and how he was now paying the price. The pastor listened carefully and said, "Peter, you are still alive, and that means there is still time. You need to confess everything, ask for forgiveness, and repent. Only then can you start your journey to redemption. But you must be ready, because there are still consequences for what you've done." Peter fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything I've done," he cried. The pastor prayed for him, asking for forgiveness for all the wrongs Peter had committed. As the pastor prayed, Peter felt a warmth inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. It was as though a heavy weight was slowly lifting off his shoulders. He knew the road to redemption would be difficult, but he was ready to try. Months passed, and Peter began to change. He stopped chasing wealth and luxury and started helping others. He spent his days teaching people the truth about the dark forces he had once served, warning them not to make the same mistakes he had made. He became a different person, a man who now cared more about kindness, hard work, and honesty than about riches and power. Meanwhile, Tola was thriving in her new life. She had started her own business, and it was doing incredibly well. She became a strong voice for young women, teaching them to hustle and make their own way in life. She told them not to follow men just for their money, but to be independent, strong, and wise. Tola's story became an inspiration to many, and soon, she was invited to speak at events, sharing her experiences and lessons learned. One day, Tola thought about Peter. She wondered how he was doing, so she decided to visit the elderly woman who had helped her so much. When she arrived at the woman's house, she was happy to see her again. The elderly woman greeted her warmly and shared Peter's story. She told Tola about his transformation and how he was now working hard to help others. Tola listened with mixed emotions. Part of her felt sad for Peter, but another part of her felt relief. She realized that Peter had never really loved her. He had married her for the same reason she had married him, because of his wealth. But now Tola understood. Peter's actions were driven by his own desires and the dark forces he had made a deal with. She decided, in that moment, that she would forgive him, not for him, but for herself. Tola made peace with her past, but she knew she wasn't going to rekindle anything with Peter. She had moved on. She had a new life now, and it was time to let go of the pain. She left the elderly woman's house, feeling lighter than she had in years. Back in her new town, Tola continued to build her empire. She became a successful businesswoman and a role model for many. She also started a program to help women escape abusive marriages and unhealthy relationships. She taught them to stand up for themselves, to be strong, and to never settle for anything less than they deserved. Many women started looking up to her. They admired her strength and determination. Some even wished they could be like her, successful, confident, and independent. But Tola remained humble. She knew what it felt like to be trapped in a life that wasn't her own, and she was determined to help others avoid that same fate. Men began to approach Tola, wanting to marry her, but she politely declined. "I'm not ready to marry again," she told them. "I've dedicated my life to helping women, to showing them how to stand strong and live their lives to the fullest. I can't be distracted by anything else right now." Years passed, and Tola's reputation grew. She became known as a woman who had overcome hardship and was now helping others do the same. Her classes for married women were filled with women eager to learn how to escape from abusive relationships. They looked up to Tola, admiring her wisdom and her courage. Meanwhile, Peter was still working on his journey to redemption. He continued to speak out about the dark forces he had once served, warning young men not to rush into things like he had. "Be patient," he would say. "Work hard. Don't let greed control you. Life is about more than money. It's about who you are inside and what you give to the world. Peter and Tola's lives had taken very different paths. Tola had found peace, success, and purpose, while Peter was still struggling to make up for the mistakes of his past. But both of them had learned valuable lessons. They had both faced darkness, but they had also found their way to the light. And as the years went by, Tola knew that her journey was just beginning. She had healed, and now she was helping others heal too. And though she had once been lost, she had found her way home, right where she belonged. Her story wasn't over yet. The future was bright, and she had many more lives to touch. But for now, she was content. Tola had learned to let go, to forgive, and to love herself. And that was the most important lesson of all.